Brussels Forum. My name is Anne McGinn. I'm the press secretary of the German Marshall Fund in Washington, D.C. I'd like to thank two of our panelists from our last session for joining us here. So we'll get straight away to questions. Please identify yourself and your organization when you're called upon. Dean, we'll start with you.
Dean Carroll from publicserviceeurope.com. The question is for Mahmoud Jibbril. You talked about Western allies and how they had perhaps abandoned Libya. But Catherine Ashton seemed to reject that thesis. What practical action on the ground could the European External Action Service, for example, give you in order to drive forward progress? And in terms of involving the .com generation to a much greater degree, how could that be done? Won't elections be enough to do that on their own?
Well, for the first question, I would argue that Libya is different from Tunisia and Egypt, because in both cases, when the regime fell down, the state continued in both countries. But in Libya, the collapse of the regime singled out the collapse of the state. So this fact should have been taken into consideration in approaching Libya after Gaddafi, which means that our priorities should be rebuilding the state, namely to rebuild the national army, prepare the country for elections, and rebuild the police. Those are the most important issues for us right now. For the European Union or the United States or the rest of the world to cooperate with us on other issues, that would be appreciated. But what I'm saying is that we have to reconcile our priorities so the assistance that we are getting can be filled and can be compatible with the needs of the moment. For the .com generation, I'm afraid, having them coming to an election day is not an easy task, because of the legacy of 42 years. We need an intensive effort of campaigning just to raise the awareness of the importance of getting involved, of taking part in politics, explain to them the terms which are new terms for them, such as the constitution or elections. Those concepts, are not there, for the last 42 years, So the effort should be a multiple effort, awareness first, and then encouraging this young generation to come to the elections to make an impact on election day.
Is it on? Ekaterina Karaseva, RTTV, Brussels Bureau. I'd like to ask a question to both speakers. Mr. Jibbril, you mentioned that the revolutionary movement will win. Is Bahrain the case as well? And in your view, do the events in Bahrain, the recent escalation of protests, call for more international reaction? Thank you. Well,
I think Bahrain is a little bit different from the cases in the four other countries, First of all, it's basically a sectarian revolt. It's not a popular uprising, This not to say that it's not legitimate or that their demands or rights are not legitimate. Yes, they have legitimate demands to be treated as equal citizens. What I'm saying is that the case is a little bit different from the other cases, I think with some modifications in the political agenda of King Abdullah, I think they can accommodate those sectarian rights and Bahrain can enjoy some stability again.
I would echo the perspective that each one of these is different, and so it's hard to apply just one template or cookie-cutter approach, and I would echo the observation that each one is different. One trend, though, that you see is in many of these cases people moving towards freedom and democracy. In some cases, the current regime resists that. Other cases, they're willing to at least incrementally move towards it. In other cases, it erupts more dramatically and precipitously, as we saw in Tunisia and other places. But the situation in Bahrain, I think, is at the point where the international community can continue to encourage reform and openness and movements towards freedom, but it's not the same or at the same stage as some of the other countries.
Hi, Terry Schultz, freelance with NPR and CBS News. A question again for both speakers. Mr. Jibbril, last night the Syrian opposition told us that they feel that it's an unfair characterization of their movements, that they are disorganized and disunited, and that that the Libyan opposition was much the same way until the United States took a clear interest and went in and helped organize them. Do you think that that's a fair comparison, and that that in fact, if the U.S. took a more hands-on approach with organizing the opposition, that would make a big difference, and also be more fair, give them a better chance of gaining international support? And for the governor, do you think that the Syrian people have any hope whatsoever of gaining more traction as an issue in the United States, especially in an election year with few interests, national interests in Syria under any circumstances? Is an election year just a hopeless situation? I know as a foreign affairs journalist it's tough to get stories on.
With respect to the last part of your question, I did mention during the panel discussion, and again, this is only speaking in my individual capacity, not with respect to any other titles I hold. It's my view that it's time for the West and for a coalition of free countries to try to help, at least explore helping the opposition in Syria more directly. Now, this can take a variety of forms. It could take the form of economic assistance. It could take the form of technology and communications assistance. The ability for the West or kind of coalition of free countries to enable technology to block out certain other capacities that are trying to oppress technology and communication, and the free flow of information could be a powerful assist. And in my view, I think it's also time to consider some other direct assistance in terms of the opposition's capability to fight militarily. I don't think that should include boots on the ground, but as we've seen throughout history, there are other ways that can be helpful to that effort, and I'll leave the rest of it for my comments on the panel. In terms of your question on unity of the opposition in Syria or in other places, complete unity or perfect unity hasn't always been a prerequisite to assisting those who yearn for freedom and democracy. So you've seen many examples throughout history of the opposition not being completely unified, but those who favor freedom stepping in and helping directionally, even if the opposition wasn't perfectly unified. So we would hope for more unity within the opposition in Syria. That's a good goal directionally, but I personally don't believe it should be the sole prerequisite to the free world providing more assistance. I think it can be done without that unity. And as has been noted, there isn't even unity in the UN Security Council. You have Russia, for example, voting a certain way, and in recent news reports of, in fact, Russia supplying special operation capabilities to Syria in a way that would train or better equip or inform them as to how to oppress and potentially kill people. So there's not even unity within the UN Security Council, obviously, but on the ground, I don't think that perfect unity within the opposition is necessarily a sole prerequisite to providing assistance.
Well, first of all, let me say that it's not true at all that the United States has helped organize the TNC. Nobody, and I mean nobody, has helped organize the TNC. It was a Libyan effort. It was a Libyan-made 100%. And I can recall the first 2-3 meetings with the United States officials. The core of that meeting was trying to introduce the TNC to the United States. So it's an outrageous accusation in the Syrian part to say that it was organized by the United States or anybody for that effect. What I'm saying is that our Syrian brothers need unity, and I know what I'm talking about. Unity is needed more when there is no adequate international support, because the impact of that unity will be felt the most. When you have an international support, even if you don't have absolute unity, a perfect unity, still you can compensate from other sources of support. But your unity is your main source of support right now. So you can rally behind you all popular support from the Syrian people. You can talk to the people, to the outside world in one voice, and this is very crucial, to have an impact on the ground.
I'm afraid we only have time for one more question.
Yeah, it's Lawrence Norman at Dow Jones and Wall Street Journal. Question for Governor Pawlenty. You didn't mention the possibility of bombing Syria, which I know is something that Senator McCain has talked about. Would you consider that to be taking US intervention a little too far at this point, or is that something you'd add to the list?
I think at this point, what I would be prepared to say is the time has come to provide more direct assistance to the opposition in Syria. And as I mentioned, from my view, that could include economic assistance, communications and technological assistance, and more direct assistance in terms of the opposition's capability. Beyond that, I think other things could be discussed, but I would leave it at the contours I've just described to you for today.